One of my favorite parts about doing Journey with Jake is when I learn things about my guests that really surprise me. I went into my conversation with Dan Mathews expecting this conversation to be about hunting. And while we did talk quite a bit about hunting, it was much more than that. Dan, along with his wife Samantha and their two children, are all about finding adventure. The adventure even included an opportunity to be a surrogate for two couples hoping to have children of their own. What an opportunity to speak with Dan Mathews. Just don't try to get him to eat sushi. It is not his thing. Welcome to Journey with Jake. This is a podcast about adventure and how through our adventures we can overcome the challenges of life that come our way. While I expect you will learn some things about different adventures, this show will entertain you. Each episode will feature a different guest or guests as they share experiences and stories from the different adventures they have been on. Not only will you be entertained, but you will also hear the failures and trials each guest faces and what they have done or are doing to overcome the hardships that come their way. My goal is to take each of us on a journey through the experiences of my guests with the hope that you'll be entertained and inspired to overcome your day-to-day challenges. After all, it's not all about the destination as it is about the journey. Another episode of Journey with Jake. I'm your host, Jake Bushman, and this is episode 125. I was joined by the Nomadic Outdoorsman, Dan Mathews, on today's episode, and what a fantastic and fun conversation. Before we get to my conversation with Dan, be sure and give me a follow on Instagram at Journey with Jake Podcast. This is a great way to see what we have going on with the podcast, and probably the best way to get to know me personally, as I like to share some posts and stories about my life and what is going on. So check me out on Instagram at Journey with Jake Podcast. Journey with Jake is also on YouTube. This is still relatively new for me, but I know some of you like to watch the episodes, and this is the place to do it. Just search Journey with Jake Podcast on YouTube. I knew my guest, Dan Mathews, would be great, but I think it was even better than I imagined. You are all going to love this episode with Dan. If you like this episode, you will also enjoy one of my earlier episodes, episode number 5 with Skylar Harrison, all about his experiences as a hunter. Okay, on to my conversation with the Nomadic Outdoorsman, Dan Mathews. I'm excited because I have Dan Mathews on the show with me today from, the Nomadic Outdoorsman? Did I get that right?
No, that's perfect. Yeah, the Nomadic Outdoorsman.
Love it. Thanks for joining me on the show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. When you told me it's all about adventure, I was like, dude, that's like our life motto is always choose adventure. So I'm like, I'm all about it. Let's hop on.
Sweet. Yeah. Always choose adventure. I love that. I love hearing people's stories. That's kind of what I want to do with you, is just kind of know a little bit about who you are. So if you don't mind starting off, just a little background, kind of where you're from, a little bit about the family, and then we'll kind of dive into some of your adventures.
Yeah, that sounds good. So my name's Dan Mathews. I'm a husband, father of 2. I got a little boy and a little girl. And my wife and I, we met, 15 plus years ago now. It's closer to 20, actually. But we've been married 10 years. And right when we got married, we were talking to a good friend of ours out in Colorado. And he was like, when my kids ask for advice, when there's multiple doors open, I tell them, choose the most adventurous one. And so when we heard that, we started running with it. And that's kind of when we quit our 9-to-5s and started doing content creation, started traveling more, spending more time with our family. We lived in an RV for like a year, but we traveled in it for like 4 months and hit 30 states, I think, 20 something states. And yeah, that kind of kicked off our life now. I mean, between my wife being a surrogate, starting podcasts, starting social media, writing a book, like we just always, in everything we do, we're like, what's the more adventurous thing to do? Let's go with that.
That's amazing. And it seems like you have to have courage to do that, because I feel like I'm kind of risk averse a little bit. So when I hear someone who does that, it kind of blows my mind. What was your 9-to-5, I guess? What was your profession before you decided, hey, we're going to go adventure?
So I worked a bunch of different jobs. I worked for a nonprofit for a couple of years, and I absolutely loved it. Got to do some traveling with it. I was like a volunteer coordinator, so I would oversee volunteer events every week at our facility. And then I worked in the armor industry, making body and vehicle armor for law
Oh,
enforcement. Uh, the bulk of what I did before all of this was construction, though, and so I was doing indoor construction, outdoor construction, building decks, you name it. And then that led into my wife and I starting an RV renovation company. And so we burned through a bunch of RVs, renovated them for people, made them look like houses on the inside instead of nursing homes. And we we did that for a couple of years. And that's when we were like, this is it. We can't go back to work. Like, we can figure this out for ourselves. We both have a pretty intense drive to succeed. And so that led into social media. But I've worked a bunch of odd jobs. It's not, I've never had like a full on career um, until I would say this, but working for myself now. So
wow. And you live in Missouri. Is your wife from, did you grow up in Missouri, or is that just where you ended up?
no, so I grew up in Wisconsin. I grew up in
Okay.
central Wisconsin, dairy land. I mean, just cows and big woods everywhere. And moved down here in 2007 to go to Bible college. That's where I met my wife. She was in high school at the time. She had like 2 more years. We met because I actually attended college with her sister, and she's basically from Missouri. She tells people I was born in California, but I'm like, you moved here when you were like real little, so you don't even have to claim that anymore. You're from Missouri.
She's Missourian, even
Yeah.
though she was born in California.
Yeah, she's
Okay,
a better
funny. So
driver than most Missourians. If you've ever driven through Missouri, as soon as you hit that state line, it's like, did they all
what
just get their
happened?
driver's license? What happened?
That's awesome. So she was still in high school when you met her. You were at college with her sister. You guys met. Now, growing up, your background as a brothers, sisters, you're an only child. What's kind of the situation there?
So I've got 3 older sisters and a younger brother, and throughout my elementary years, my brother and I were outside all the time. Like, we got a BB gun, and at that point, it was like we're shooting every leaf off of every tree, shooting soda cans. Like, we're going to be outside doing something. And both of my parents actually grew up in Wisconsin. They got into hunting. I feel like later in life, they got serious about it. And at that point, I was, 4 or 5 years old. And when I could first remember them going out hunting, I was like, man, I want to go do this. I want to see what it's all about. And we would just sit at home, me and my brother and my sisters, and we were waiting for them to get back. Like, what happened? What did you see? Like asking all of the questions about how their day went out in the woods. And once I got to like 9, 10-ish, they started actually taking me with and letting me sit in the woods with them. And that's when I was hooked. Like, everything revolved around the outdoors at that point.
What do you remember about the first time going out on a hunt with your parents?
I remember getting really cold, and my dad was kind of like, dude, you just need to sit still and be quiet. Like, the deer know that if you're moving around, they're going to see you before we see them. But it was really cool to just learn about the outdoors, like hearing the different sounds, walking in at 4 a.m. with a headlamp on. And I'm thinking, there's bears and wolves out here. Like, something's going to get me. And my dad, he had been doing it for long enough that he's like, just chill out. Everything's okay. And then the first time I had ever actually been with somebody when they had a successful hunt, it was with my dad, and he was like, okay, sit still, don't do anything. Like, I said, hey, I need to put my mittens on, like my hands are freezing. And he's like, I'll let you know if I see a deer. And I turned around. We were both sitting on this down tree. It had tipped over in a storm or something. And we're sitting on this tree. And I turn around to put my mittens on, and I just hear boom. And I turn around, and there's a deer running straight at us. And I'm like, oh, and he pulls the trigger again, and we ended up grabbing it and taking it back home. And I just couldn't believe it. Like a wild animal out there, you might not see anything for hours. And then as soon as you hear a twig snap, your senses are all up, you're on high alert. And yeah, it was just a weird rush that I got. It was just this crazy primitive feeling that I still get today when I go out.
Do you remember the first time you got your first deer?
I do. It was a couple years into hunting, like when I could actually hunt myself,
Sure.
and I I had made a tree stand out of 2x4s and plywood. And the fact that my parents even let me hang that up in a tree blows my mind to this day. But I'm using her like plug-in power tools. I'm cutting pieces, and it was just an L-shaped chair that I strapped to a tree with a ratchet strap. And I brought out an old wooden ladder that my mom got from a yard sale. It was like a 6-foot ladder. Put it as high up in the tree. I mean, my feet were probably maybe 6 or 7 feet off the ground. And it was the final day of deer season in Wisconsin. And I saw a deer come through. I get my shotgun to my shoulder. I was shooting a 20 gauge shotgun with a bead sight, which if anybody knows hunting, like that's not what you use for hunting. And this deer comes through and I saw it was a buck. I was really excited. I pull up, pull the trigger. Everything felt good. I climb down and go over there, and there's nothing, no sign that it had been hit. It ran off. I watched it run off, and I go over there and there's nothing. And I'm like, I'm so upset because it's the final day. I've got an hour left of hunting for the whole next year.
Mhm.
And as I'm walking back, I can see a tree branch. It was about an inch around, and it was just hanging there. And I clearly hit that tree branch when I pulled the trigger. And so I got up in my stand. I was so mad at myself that I didn't see the tree branch. And as I'm sitting there like sulking and complaining, I catch movement right in front of me. And there's like 7 deer right in front of me. I'm
What?
talking like 7 yards in front of me. But I wasn't paying attention. I was just like complaining. And so I pull my shotgun back up, and there was a deer, right at the base of my tree, essentially. I pulled the trigger. It went down right there. I started yelling. My mom and my dad came up, and they're like, "Did you get one?" And at this point, I mean, season had, like, I shot, and it was maybe a couple minutes, and season had ended.
Wow.
And so they came up, and they've got their flashlights out, and they're like, "Did you get something?" I said, "Yeah." And they're like, "Where is it?" And I'm like, "It's right next to you." And they like turn with their flashlights, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, it's right here." I said, "That's where
Right
it was when
there.
I shot." Yeah. So
That's amazing.
that was my first experience, like actually taking an animal myself. And I knew how much like having that meat all year long meant to my family. I mean, we hardly bought beef. We hardly bought steaks or ground burger. It was all venison that we would go out and harvest ourselves, and we would eat it all throughout the year. So it was a very proud moment, to say the least.
That's what I love about hunters like you. The fact that you do, that's what you're doing it for the meat too. I love that. You're not just,
Oh yeah.
yeah, there's a sport to it, but I appreciate that about hunters like you. Cause I mean, I totally respect hunters and what they do. And there's definitely a need for them. And I'm glad, but I'm glad you're doing it the right way. It sounds like, so that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I feel like today a lot of people get a bad rap for being a trophy hunter. And, if you were in the podcast studio with me or in my man cave, like you'd see all the racks up on the walls, and
Mm-hmm.
people are like, "Oh, that's what you do it for." I'm like, "Well, I've got 3 deep freezers full of elk and ducks and rabbit and squirrel and deer and everything." And it like these things that I put up on my wall, it's a memory. I walk by it just the same as you would have a memory on your phone with a picture. Like I have that up on my wall. And I would say the large majority of hunters have a great respect and a deep knowledge of the animals that they're pursuing. And it's not just like, I got to go kill the biggest thing I can.
Right.
I think the few that do that end up giving the rest of us a bad name.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it's amazing that first one, especially because you shot up the other one, and I'm surprised there were still deer around. Like and there they were, right
In,
by you.
in Wisconsin, it's wild because they call us the Orange Army, the people who go out during rifle season. It's a 9-day season. It starts the Saturday before Thanksgiving, ends the Sunday after, and there are hundreds of thousands of people in the woods in blaze orange out there for the purpose of getting meat or like shooting a deer. And because of that, I think it's so chaotic in the woods that the deer are just moving. Like people are driving in on 4-wheelers or walking in, and so the pressure
That's a good
is
point.
pushing deer around. And I've actually I joke that like shooting a gun is almost a deer call in Wisconsin. I can't tell you how many deer I've shot and immediately had one right next to me. Or like I had one almost run me and my nephew over. I took him out hunting for his first time, and I had just shot a deer, and we got up to go and get it. And, we were going to get the four-wheeler, drive it back, load it up, all that. And I'm looking up on the hill at my cousin who's hunting, and we're like talking to each other, having a loud conversation in the woods. And I yelled at him. I'm like, to your left, to your left. And this deer ran 5 feet from him down the hill and was coming straight up at us. And so we kind of like put our arms up like, hey, there's something
We're
here.
here.
Don't run us over. And it hit the brakes in a hurry and turned and ran through the woods. But yeah, for whatever reason, it seems like when you pull the trigger, deer start showing up.
Interesting. I would have never thought of that. I was like, wait a minute, you missed that one. I was waiting to hear you say you found it later or something.
Oh, yeah.
Like that's what I was waiting for. Me like, no, you hit the branch, and then it's
Totally
different.
Clean miss, man. That was a rough one, but it ended up well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So let's bring your wife into the picture. Is she? Because you said she's adventurous too. Is she into hunting or other types of adventure?
She's definitely into all types of adventure. She's trying to get more into hunting. I bought her a bow for her birthday. She shoots it every now and then. But like hunting, she views that as my thing. Like she kind of wants me to have that. But like even dating, we were going on trips together. We were going down to Florida. We were going down to the Buffalo River in Arkansas and floating in a canoe, camping on the river, like hiking, biking, you name it. We just like being outside. And like she didn't grow up that way. She was a hip hop dance instructor when we first started talking. So she was like city girl. And I mean, you would have never thought, and she jokes about it to this day, like if you asked me in high school what life would be like married, I would never think I'm going to have like squirrels and rabbits in my freezer. And I'm like, yeah, sorry, that's what you get with a boy from Wisconsin. But she definitely likes it. She encourages it, and she is crazy supportive. Like I leave for Alaska here in just under a month. And so I'll be gone for 11 days. And she's just like, good luck, babe. Like, what do you need? Do we need to order anything before you head out? And I'm getting my kids into it. They both are just ate up with the outdoors. I mean, they just like looking at animals. They try to catch frogs in our koi pond all the time. And it's a really cool thing to get your family involved in. And she's the first call I make every time I successfully harvest an animal. I call her, FaceTime her, she gets excited. She's like, sweet, does that mean like I have you back now for the fall? And I'm like, no, I've got more tags to fill.
That's awesome. That's great that you have that kind of relationship where you can do that. Since she said it is kind of your thing, she likes to keep it as your thing, so to speak. Yeah. What does hunting, what does being out in the outdoors when you're just out there by yourself, what does it mean to you? What does it do for you?
I mean, I feel like it is when people experience it like in a pure form, and it's not necessarily the same for everybody. I feel like hunting is just deep in a lot of us. Like it's a very new thing to not hunt for your food. Like the last 50 years, it's really become less common to hunt than it is to not hunt. And for all of human history, man has done this. And so I'm like, when you get people out there, even people who had never shown interest in it, I take people out. I try to hunt with like 20 new people every year. And to see like the look on their face when they're seeing an owl fly out of a tree to try to catch a field mouse, or, they hear something in the river or in the pond, there's like this weird connection that they immediately have with nature. And my wife and I are people of deep, deep faith. And so I'm like, I feel like the outdoors is kind of my church, like I feel connected to God. I feel like I'm just at peace. I don't have to worry about anything. I don't have to think about anything. And then especially going on like bigger adventurous hunts, going out to Utah and hunting the mountains out there, or Colorado or Alaska, or even just a new piece of property that I've never hunted before. There's just something wild about it. And yeah, I don't know. I just feel at peace out there.
How long ago did you start your podcast? Because your podcast it's based on hunting, right? The Nomadic Outdoorsman. Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah, it's all hunting and fishing, fishing in the outdoors. And so I started that. It's got to be about 4 years ago now, which doesn't seem right. It feels like I started it yesterday, but I'm about I'm like 220 episodes into it. So
Nice.
it's been it's been a lot. I've been joking with my wife. I'm like, I have sat and talked for like 10 straight days about hunting at this point, you know. But I mean, I could talk about it all day long, and the whole idea behind that was I'm a storyteller. I like to be goofy. You can hardly catch me being serious. And I've listened to other podcasts of people talking about this stuff. And I'm like, I want people to understand what opportunities are close by or even, you know, a state away. Because growing up in Wisconsin, it was that 9-day block, you know, the week of Thanksgiving, basically, we were out hunting.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until I moved down here that I really started exploring other things. Like, people in Missouri go out and catch frogs. Like, there is a season for frog hunting. They call it frog gigging. And you either go out and you catch them with a net, with your hand, with a spear, and you eat the legs. And I'm like, well, I didn't know about this. And they're really good. Like, there are high-end restaurants that have frog legs on the menu. And so once I started figuring this stuff out, I was like, man, you can go down to Florida and shoot iguanas. They're an invasive species and they end up being a really big problem. Like, you can go and hunt these crazy Asian deer that are in Maryland for whatever reason they're there. And so there's cool opportunities to get out if you're into the outdoors, if you're into hunting, if you're into new meat. And I would argue that, you know, elk and moose are some of the best meats on the planet. Venison is amazing and it's healthy. And so, yeah, that was the whole idea behind the podcast. And it turned into, when people ask, what do I talk about on the podcast? I said everything from frog gigging to moose hunting. So, like, that's a big range.
Yeah.
But yeah, talking about opportunity.
So you brought it up, so I'm going to ask, and maybe not put you on the spot a little bit, but just moose hunting. I've always been intrigued by. I've only seen one moose in the wild ever, but I've always been intrigued. So it sounds like you've been on some moose hunts. Am I correct?
Yeah.
No?
So I've been on one moose hunt so far.
Okay.
It's a very difficult tag to get in the lower 48. You have to. I mean, it's an investment for sure. Like, when I apply for Colorado moose tags, I have to spend $100 every year just to basically get a point towards a draw for a moose. And so it's like every year I'm doing that, and maybe in my lifetime I'll end up getting a moose tag. But when you know somebody who gets one, especially if you're close hunting buddies, it's like, jump on that opportunity because you might not ever have it again. And so my buddy ended up drawing a once in a lifetime moose tag in Colorado, and we went out there, did a scouting mission in July, just rode around on the side by side looking for moose, found a ton of moose, and then he successfully harvested one opening day of his season. And so that at this point is the only experience I have, but we leave for Alaska at the beginning of September, and we're going to go after moose and caribou and maybe black bear if we see one. So.
Wow. Okay. It just seems intense. I mean, a moose just seems really cool. Like, I don't know. Because you hear about the deer, and deer are everywhere. Utah, you know, I walk outside and I see a deer practically, you know, so I'm sure Wisconsin's probably the same way. So I'm always, since I've only seen one in the wild, I'm like, I always want to know about the moose hunts, and those things are big, and, you know, I don't know. I think it'd be pretty cool. So they're
really big animals. And I mean, there's so much planning that goes into that, because it's not like a deer where, you know, like, you can just grab it and drag it to your truck and throw it in the bed. Yeah. I mean, some of these animals, like, just one hind leg might weigh a couple 100 pounds, and you have to carry that off the mountain. You have to get it back, take care of the meat so that it doesn't rot or you don't lose any of it. And it's going to be an adventure, to say the least. There's 5 of us going. None of us have done this before. And so we're going to figure it out as we go.
5 of you going. I think that's a part of, when I think of hunting too, I think of that part of it, the bonding and just the camaraderie of being out there with your buddies. Is that something that's big for you as well?
That's probably the biggest thing when it comes to hunting for me. I love to hunt. I don't mind being out by myself at all. Like, I do plenty of solo hunts throughout the year, but the camaraderie behind it, the fellowship behind it, when we go out, some of my closest friends in the world, in fact, I would say out of my 10 closest friends, probably 9 of them hunt, and we've hunted together or we continue to hunt together, and we make traditions out of it. You know, like, we get together on the last day of June every year, and we get our gigs together, get ready to go frog gigging. We're walking around in cow ponds, like sometimes chest deep, and we're looking for frogs. And then we do the same thing for like dove hunting and the same thing for deer hunting. So that aspect of it. And then we're communicating about it all the time. Our wives think we're crazy because we're like sending pictures from cameras, like, oh, look what buck just came in tonight. Like, they go, this is what you do with your time? And I'm like, this is what we love. You know, we bond over it'd be similar like fantasy football or people who play video games together. But it's a weird thing that I feel like a lot of people have it in them and they just have no idea that it's there, or a desire to be outside that much.
Love that. Thank you for sharing that. Kind of want to go back to your little motto again, the little family motto, always choose adventure. Kind of give me the background on how this came about, and how did you say, hey, we're going to quit this 9 to 5 thing and we're going to be adventurous. Kind of what's the story behind that?
Yeah, I think we partnered it with a thing that we heard on TV one time, and it was a guy talking about success and what his view of success was. And he said, we as a family don't view success as how much money's in our bank account, but how much time we have to do what we love. And I was like, dang, like this guy doesn't have anything. It was a show about Alaskans and living like very primitively. And he's like, that's what it is for us. And my wife and I, it struck a chord with both of us. And I'm like, we don't have the time freedom. We have to answer to somebody. Like, if we want to take time for our family, I've got to go and get approval for that in order to miss work. And then it's like, okay, you've taken up all your time. Now you owe us the rest of the year. And I'm like, that's so wild that we don't view time as a currency. And I feel like it is the most important currency. And so at that point, I was looking at phasing out of a job. I had 2 new opportunities for jobs. I didn't feel a peace about one, so I went ahead and like closed that door. And then we ended up moving from Colorado back to Missouri. And at that point, it was like, what am I going to do? Am I going to go and apply and do interviews and stuff, or do we figure this thing out for ourselves? And so I picked up some work doing construction with my buddy. And at that point, we had already renovated a camper that we lived in personally for a while. And when we decided to sell that, we listed it and made a ton of money on it. And I'm like, my wife was like, hey, I follow people who do this and they make good money. And I said, why don't we do it? And so we started, pursuing that, getting more tools, getting the things that we need to actually renovate campers. And we had a couple people reach out like, hey, we've got a camper. My wife had been doing some social media stuff at that point, and they were like, hey, if you'd be interested, we owe a certain amount on the camper. You guys renovate it. We will, we just need the money that we owe back, but you guys keep the profit. And I'm like, hey, this is no overhead except for materials. Let's go ahead and do it. And so that just kind of snowballed, and we did several. And once we had that time freedom, because even at that point, we decided that we were going to work on the campers Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then Friday through Monday, we had time to spend as a family. And even on those days, it was like some days we'd be like, hey, you know what? Let's go to breakfast this morning. We'll start working on the camper at 10. And then maybe the afternoon something came up. Hey, do you want to go and see this show or go to the rodeo, or I don't know, whatever came up. And we'd leave it too. And I'm like, this is amazing. I can't believe for the first half, or like our entire marriage up until this point, we've just been answering to other people, and we get home and we're exhausted. And it's like our time together isn't quality anymore because we've given so much at our jobs. And so once we got to that point, we said, hey, we're going to really dive into this adventurous lifestyle. We're really going to focus and prioritize family time. And that led to where we're at now. I mean, my wife has started multiple businesses. We're in the process. Actually, we just got the manuscript for a book, and it's wild. It still blows my mind that this is what we're doing now.
It's incredible. I look at what you're doing, and I see, you talk about adventure. And one question I always like to ask is, what does adventure mean to you?
I feel like adventure to me is just doing something new. Like it could be anything. You could be adventurous with where you go to dinner. You might have the same spot that you always go, and you're like, I don't need to go anywhere else. we know we like this. But you could make little adventurous choices and just try something new, and it might turn into your favorite thing. Like, I didn't know that I was going to like hiking up mountains because I had never done it, and someone invited me to do it. I didn't know that I would like fly fishing, and then someone invited me to do it. I didn't, and the list goes on and on. And so trying something new, stretching yourself, getting outside of your comfort zone, I feel like is basically what adventure is. And it could look totally, I mean, you could buy a car and be like, you know what? I'm going to try to figure this out on my own. I'm going to try to swap the engine, get on YouTube Academy. You're on an adventure right now with restoring an old car or just fixing a car up yourself. And the beauty is there's so much information out there now. It kind of takes away that barrier of entry to a lot of new experiences for people. You can get online, learn whatever you want. And I just feel like most people don't have a good excuse for why they can't be adventurous. And so that's where we talk with our friends all the time, like, hey, maybe try this. Don't think about it. Just go out and try it. Like, the worst that's going to happen is you fail, right? I'm not saying go and pull all of your money out of your 401k to start a business you know nothing about, but it's like take little steps towards adventure.
Take little steps towards adventure. Wow. Something that I think is adventurous in my mind because it's something new for you. Tell me about this book. What's the book about, and how did that come about?
So the book is actually all about adventure. It's just about living an adventurous life. And through social media, we've had a lot of cool opportunities, had talks with a lot of people that we didn't think we would ever have, been reached out to by brands, and a book publisher actually reached out to us and they said, hey, would you be interested in doing this? And we're like, okay. They're like, what would you want the book to be about? And we're like, our lives are so crazy between surrogacy and podcasting and social media and RV renovation and like competing on a TV show and traveling the country. I'm like, I don't know, like, what can we fit all of that into? And so we were talking about it, and we both kind of looked at each other on the very first call, and we're like, it's got to be about adventure. Like, that's the only way that we could sum up our lives, our marriage, our relationship into one book. And so that's what it's going to be about. I think it will officially release next summer. The book writing process is very long. The manuscript, we have to go over it and make some changes if there's details that we missed. And then, we still have to work on a cover and how we're going to release it and all of these different things that I'm not like, I did terrible in school. I was not a dumb person, but I just didn't care about school. I mean, it was kind of the same concept back then. I was like, I only have a couple hours at home every night. I'm not going to waste it doing homework. I don't recommend this to everybody, but I never did homework. Like, I would show up and my teachers, a month into school every year, they just quit asking me for it because they knew I wasn't doing it. And that led to bad grades. That led to me not being able to play sports, like a lot of negative things. But I just knew that like my time was so valuable and like what I wanted to do. And like even going hunting, I quit a job because they wouldn't let me take off for hunting season one time. And I mean, it was at McDonald's and I had only worked there for like a week anyway, so it didn't matter that much. But throughout all of school, like I would have never, if you asked me, are you going to write a book one day? No, none of my teachers would believe it. Like that was not up my alley. And then as I started telling these stories, I found the process very like therapeutic in a way, like remembering all of the things that we've done. And it's actually brought up things that my wife and we haven't had an RV for a while. And on one of the last calls with our publisher, we're like, I kind of miss that. Like, I miss being able to just go and, you don't know where you're going to end up the next day. We spent one day in Yellowstone. And then I was like, you know what? I want to see Glacier. Let's go up to Glacier National Park. So we drove up there, and then she's like, you know what? I want to go see the Oregon coast. So we drove, and it was just like every day we might drive until 3 a.m. and sleep in a truck stop and then get back on the road the next morning. And
wow.
And so like we miss those types of things. But yeah, the book writing process it's been wild. And it's weird to say that like we're writing a book.
I know you think in your mind, writing a book, that's not very fun. But to me, that's something that's different for you. So it is an adventure.
Yeah.
Writing the book about adventure.
It has been, man. It's just cool to experience new things. Like, you don't know what you're missing out until you open yourself up to new experiences. And so that's kind of what it's turned into. I've tried new foods. Some of my wife really wishes I liked sushi, and she wishes I liked coffee, and I'm just not a coffee person, and I do not like sushi. Even when our first date that we went on, I had just broken my nose playing football, and I couldn't taste anything. And even when I couldn't taste anything, I didn't like the sushi she tried to feed me.
Even when you couldn't even taste it, you still didn't
even when I couldn't taste it, I was like, it was the best tasting sushi I had ever had because I couldn't taste it.
Something you've mentioned a couple times, surrogacy. I think that's amazing. Like, that blew me away. I didn't know that about you guys. Looking at your Instagram, and I got on your wife's, I think, and I was like, wow. That's incredible. Tell me a little bit about that. Maybe she should be the one telling about it, but just from your perspective as the husband, she was a surrogate.
Yeah, I knew nothing of surrogacy. We were living in Colorado, and I don't remember. I think she was out and about, and so she like either dropped me off at work that day and then picked me up. We were basically riding home from my work, and she looked at me and she was like, "Hey, I know that we're done having kids, but I feel like the need to be a surrogate." And I'm like, "I don't know what that even means." And she's like, "It's having a baby for somebody else." And immediately I'm like, "This is weird. Like, do you need to tell me about some guy that I don't know about, you know?" And she's like, No. It's not that at all. It's like, you can do it a couple different ways, but she's like, the way that I would do it is it's completely their, egg and sperm. I'm just like the incubator for it, in a sense. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, that sounds crazy. Like, I don't know. How would you do emotionally with that? It seems like a big, big responsibility for us to take on. And she's like, I just feel like God's given me a body that I do well with pregnancy. I know I'm done myself. But she's like, weirdly enough, I miss being pregnant. I miss delivery. And to be able to do that for a couple that can't, like, wouldn't that be awesome? And so we took like a week to pray about it and did more research. I learned a lot about it that week. And I said, you know what? If this is what you feel like you're supposed to do, let's do it. And that started the process. That led to, meeting with different people and doing psychological evaluations through this company that, like, there's companies that match you. Almost like a dating website. You have to like meet a couple and you're like, hey, is this the person we want to have a baby for? Are they like, do they like us? And for about 2 years, it just didn't really go anywhere. And so we were thinking like, maybe this isn't it. And she's like, no, I feel like it is. But in that time we were doing the RV renovations. And so like life got busy and we didn't really talk about it a lot. And somebody on her social media reached out and she's like, hey, have you looked at any of the Facebook groups? Because there's a lot of Facebook groups about it, but like there's people who match and meet each other on there. And so that's when we met the first couple. We were going through the process of like medications. She has to get like injections in her butt every night for like 70 nights. And it's like getting her body ready to be pregnant. Like, it's tricking her into thinking like, hey, yeah, everything needs to fall in line. And so we're going through all of these different tests and communication with attorneys and all this stuff. And the couple that weren't able to have a baby up until this point, they miraculously got pregnant. And they ended up carrying full term, had a healthy baby. I mean, I don't even know. She's got to be 4 years old at least at this point. And so at that point we were like, hey, listen, our goal was for you guys to bring home a healthy baby, like whether that was through us, and you guys did. And so we terminated contracts at that point, reached out or put a post out, I think, and had a ton of people submit applications to match with us. And we ended up meeting this couple. We went through the whole journey with them. They had a healthy baby. And then my wife was like, I feel like I want to do this again. That couple, things just, they decided to stay more private. They wanted to just kind of like focus on their family. And one of the things that we really desired throughout this is to build a relationship with somebody that's like an ongoing thing. And so my wife is like, I feel like I still want that. And I feel like we should do this again. So we went through the matching process again, and we picked out this couple, and she just delivered. I think she's almost a month postpartum at this point. Maybe not even, maybe like 2.5 or 3 weeks. And so they took their baby back home, and they're some of our closest friends. We go down to Florida and see them all the time. Like, they've come up here, and it's going to be a lifelong relationship that we have. But at this point, we're like completely done. My wife's crazy. She didn't have an epidural for our 2 kids or the first surrogacy journey. And then this time she decided she was going to, and I was like, this is the best thing ever. Like, this was easier on everybody involved. Like, you were comfortable, I was comfortable. Like, you weren't yet telling me what to do. Like, we just got to hang out, and then you had a baby. So she looked at me about a minute after she delivered this baby, and she goes, babe, that wasn't that bad. And I said, nope, we're cutting this off right here. We are not doing it again. We're not getting tricked back into it. So, but yeah, it's been an amazing journey. It's been awesome especially for her, to engage with the infertility community, because there's so many different reasons why people can't have babies. And so to be a voice for like an option, if you want to bring home a biological baby, like that's yours and your spouse's, it's just a really, really cool thing, and an option that, technology, science, the medical industries provided. So
It's amazing to me because, like you, I didn't even really know what it was. I've heard of
yeah.
it somewhere, but I didn't know. So I was like, and I didn't realize she did it twice. That's
Yeah.
incredible. Wow.
I tell people, because all of our friends, our family, like her grandparents, everyone was kind of confused about it at first, and they had the same hesitation and the same questions as I did. And so I was like, I'm going to break it down on an elementary level. Like, you guys have the chocolate chips and the cookie dough, but you don't have an oven. So we're going to cook it in our oven, and then you get to have the chocolate chip cookies.
You get to enjoy the cookies.
Yeah, that's basically it.
Wow. That's unbelievable. Wow. Well, good for her. Something you said as you're preparing for that, you said you took about a week or so to pray about it. I get the sense that prayer, God, that's important to you. What kind of role does that play in your life?
Man, that plays into literally everything we do. We make our decisions based off of peace, and we believe that comes from God and God alone. We both grew up in church, both grew up in families that, had a relationship with God, that followed the teachings of Jesus. And so that's been the backbone of everything that we do. And we say, like, we don't open up doors, we don't close doors, we let God do that. And then once we've got 5 doors in front of us, if we feel a peace about them, we get to choose the most adventurous one. And so we let peace guide us on everything. If we don't both, it can't be like, I'm excited about it, she feels weird about it, uncomfortable about it. Unless we both fully have peace about it, we don't move forward with anything. And the one time that we did was with actually a camper purchase. We both didn't have a peace about it, but I think she was sick at the time, and she felt obligated to go ahead and buy this thing because we drove a couple hours to go pick it up. I was like, I don't really like it, but I know she's excited about it, so I'm just going to pretend I'm excited about it. We buy it, and it was basically totaled. Like, we got it home, and everything was rotted. All the walls were rotted as soon as we started pulling off wallpaper, and we just lost all of our money on that camper. But I was like, isn't that wild that the one decision that we didn't both have a full peace about ended that way? I'm like, I don't know how else to say that other than divine intervention. Somebody was trying to tell us, don't go through with it.
Absolutely. Love that. And thank you for sharing that. Cause faith, I'm big into faith as well. And I think that's important. And I love the fact that that's kind of what you're using to guide your adventures even. Why not include deity with everything that you're doing? I think that's awesome. That's important.
Yeah. I mean, we cover everything in prayer, like, if the more time you pray about it, and I mean, there's spirituality around, like, every major civilization has some type of spirituality, and whoever you believe in, whatever you believe in, we believe in God, and we believe that, Jesus died for our sins. And so, like, we pray about everything, and it's wild the things that we've seen answered. Like, I just don't think, there's no way that I could be convinced that it just happens by chance. You know, the things that we've seen even in the last year, even the health stuff with the surrogacy journey, and like there haven't been any major complications, and I mean, it's just crazy to me. It blows my mind to think that like what would life look like if we didn't lead with peace, or like, you know, didn't have that relationship with God. What would our lives be like today?
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges that you face as you move forward?
So, I mean, I feel like our biggest challenges always are brought on by ourselves. Like it's doubt. It's like, hey, can we do this? It's over analyzing things, you know, like you get paralysis by analysis. You have too many things going on and you're just like, I don't know which one to do, so I don't do anything. And so, yeah, I feel like all of our biggest challenges are self-imposed. And then there are external challenges, especially with social media and podcasting and being in like the public eye. Because, you know, my wife, between her platforms, has several million followers. And then I've got a decent following on things. And so we get input from everybody. And that can be a challenge. We don't let it get to us most of the time, but then every now and then a comment gets through, or somebody that we know will say, hey, did you see what this person said? And it's a challenge, you know, like we have to think, are we secure in our decisions? Are we secure in who we are? Like, let's push that to the side. Let's make decisions between the two of us without all of this other input. And so, yeah, I feel like that's some of the biggest stuff that we've dealt with and that we'll probably continue to deal with going forward. It's just knowing that if I said, hey, water's really good, there would be people talking about how there's bacteria in water and this and that. Like someone's always got.
You can't win, right?
No, you really can't. And so it's like, hey, nobody's ever going to agree with. We're never going to get everybody to agree with what we say. And it was the same thing with surrogacy. Like, oh, you're just doing it for the money. Well, one of the journeys she got compensated for. This last journey, she decided, you know what? We're not going to take any compensation at all. And I mean, it's a big financial burden, but people will like attack us for that. And it's like, now I can speak from a place of both. Like this wasn't a money grab for me. Like I didn't make anything on this. This was literally because I wanted to bless somebody with a child. And it's like, hey, we're good with that. And then there's people who are like, oh, well, you got more fame for it. And I'm like, okay, at what point do you just have to block it all out? Because it's like you do it and you try to be as pure and honest about it as you can. And then something still comes back to you.
So we talked about social media a little bit. Tell everybody where they can find your podcast, where they can find you on social media. If people want to look you up and say, who is this Dan Mathews guy? What's he all about?
Yeah. So everything for me is the Nomadic Outdoorsman, and it's outdoors man. Sometimes I say it fast and it gets messed
Sounds
up.
Like men.
Yeah, the Nomadic Outdoorsman on every single platform. And then my wife and I and our page combined is We Are Dan and Sam. So all spelled out, just We Are Dan and Sam. We're not super creative. Like we would have been the people in charge of naming the ant eater, right? It eats ants. That's what we're going to call it.
It eats ants. It's an anteater.
Yeah.
No, I love it. I didn't even know about you and your wife's page at all till today. I was like,
yeah.
Oh, wow. Like, you know, you've got things, because I saw, you know, she would tag you on some stuff on yours. That's how I found that out. And that was a lot of fun. The podcast, also the Nomadic Outdoorsman, correct, for the podcast? Beautiful.
Yeah.
So anybody, want to get your hunting fix, definitely check it out. Listen to Dan on that. Before we wrap up, what kind of words of advice do you give to someone who's thinking, okay, maybe, you know, what do I need to do to be adventurous? Or maybe I want to go on my first hunt. What kind of, you know, what words of advice are you giving to someone like that who's on the fence?
I would say try it. The most you learn is from failure. And so I don't think failure should be feared. I think it should be accepted and just try to fail forward. Like you learn from it and it gets you closer to your destination or your end goal, or, you know, your financial, like what you're desiring financially. Like everything you do, there's going to be failure at some point. And so don't let that hold you back, and get out and try something new.
I love it. Dan Mathews, thank you so much for coming on Journey with Jake.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks to Dan Mathews for coming on the show with me. I'm so enriched and a better person every week from the show. So thank you, Dan, for being a part of Journey with Jake. If you want to hear more from Dan, check out his podcast, The Nomadic Outdoorsman. You can also follow Dan on social media at The Nomadic Outdoorsman. Outdoorsman. Remember, this is man, M-A-N, and not M-E-N. Also follow at We Are Dan and Sam to see the account of Dan and his wife, Samantha, and what they have going on, including their surrogacy journey. What I love about their Instagram account is they're just funny and goofy. It is just a lot of fun, down-to-earth couple. Tons of fun, so check them out. Thanks to each and every one of you for tuning in and listening to Journey with Jake each week. It means the world to me. Do me a favor and leave me a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. This would mean a lot to me and is a way to spread the word about Journey with Jake. Next week on Journey with Jake, I have Beth Atencio on the show. Beth is living the van life all by herself, and she's an empty nester now. She calls it her midlife adventure rather than her midlife crisis. And I was really impressed with Beth, who she is, and what this adventure means to her. Be sure and check out next week's episode with Beth. Just remember, it's not always about the destination as it is about the journey. Take care, everybody.